Hey guys, and welcome to episode 29 of the Revive Yourself podcast. Here we go.
Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? Have you got a health issue that just won't go away no matter what you try? Then welcome to the Revive Yourself podcast, where we reveal the secrets to long-lasting health by getting to the root cause of problems that no one else is talking about. So you can have more energy, clear skin, healthier hair, a leaner physique, more confidence, and most importantly, do the things you love and live the life you deserve. Here's your host, Ryan Martin.
So guys, welcome to episode 29 of the Revive Yourself podcast. Hope you're all doing well this week. So had some great feedback on last week's episode with Rob and Josh from the Unit Fitness. Anyone who's in Cambridge or around that area, definitely check them out. They've got a great facility there, and it was real good fun being on their podcast and answering lots of questions and just giving my perspective on things, because I know it's really good fun to get guests on here, but there's lots that we and obviously there's lots that we cover, and but no, sometimes it's good for you guys to hear some of my stuff, and that's why I've been putting out a few more episodes where I'll be covering some topics myself. I'm definitely going to be going into the brain set side of things with you guys sometime soon as well. Also, guys, I just want to mention I've been getting some brilliant feedback from our free 4-day gut revival mini course, and if you want in on that, then send me an email to ryan@reviveyourself.co. but by now hopefully it's all up on our site as well. If you go to www.reviveyourself.co, on our homepage you should be able to get access to it there. If not, just send me an email. But yeah, been getting some great feedback on that. People are loving it. And if you've got a chronic issue such as a gut issue, IBS, Crohn's, celiac, if you've got skin issues, if you've got a thyroid problem, adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue, whatever it may be, if it's a chronic issue that's kept you there, arthritis for example, then this course is really going to help you understand what you need to do to get yourself back in balance and to correct these issues and to really heal yourself internally so you can start living life on your terms again. Also guys, as I said before, we are at revive_yourself on Instagram. We are on Facebook /Revive Natural Health, so you can find us there too. And yeah, we've been getting some great feedback, and thanks so much for we're building on our followers all the time on Facebook and on Instagram, and been getting some great feedback about the episodes here. So anyway guys, today's episode is with Derek Woodske. Now, I first met Derek back in 2007-2008 when he was working for the Poliquin Group, which is a strength and conditioning company, when I was doing personal training. And Derek is he's a phenomenal guy. He's so knowledgeable when it comes to human performance. It's a topic that I don't really say I'm health and fitness, because the fitness industry generally is full of, these days, a lot of charlatans, just a lot of marketing schemes, and a lot of it, if you don't know where you're looking, is just gimmicky and it's just rubbish. I mean, there are some phenomenal people out there doing some great work, and I can point you in their direction if you need me too, but there's also a lot of people out there just selling snake oil, the same as there is in the health industry, and it just becomes really, really tedious. And I don't like to align myself with the fitness industry as well, because on the supplement side of things, a lot of them do it if it fits your macros, which it just gives you people chronic issues no matter what they say. And they're also drinking lots of protein shakes that are just hugely toxic for the body, isolates cheaply manufactured things, products, things like ZMA. It's all synthetic. A lot of it's derived from coal tar in there, and other chemicals, and all of it is hugely toxifying to the human body. And along with gut issues comes a whole host of other symptoms and issues down the line that once you start digging into that, along with their sports drinks and monsters and caffeine and Red Bull, and the list is endless. I go into it for days, but anyway, that's why I keep away from it generally. But when you've got someone of the knowledge level of Derek that you can tap into, then you've got to do it, in my opinion. Derek is a former athlete himself. He used to throw the hammer for Canada, and he's got national records and broke national records in that. He's also after his career as an athlete, I mean, he went through a tremendous injury as well, which had to rehab, which is something that builds character and will allow you to listen to his story on that as well. And then he went in and he actually started to coach in the NFL. So he's been around professional, amateur sport as an athlete and as a coach. He then moved into the private sector when he was doing personal training and teaching for Poliquin Group. And now he has his own website at ecobolic.com, where he helps people, clients all over the world in training for either athletes training for serious events. He's got Olympic athletes, and he also helps your normal guys and girls themselves get in the best shape for them, for whatever they want in life, train for life, or if they're weekend warriors, prepare for their sport, whatever it may be. But he's a very, very knowledgeable guy, and he's someone that we're very lucky to have. And I keep on saying the word very, so I apologise for that. But we touch on lots of different topics around human performance, around athletes, around rest and recovery. We even go into PEDs, performance enhancing drugs, and drug use. We touch on CrossFit because that's such a popular sport these days, and industry, the good, the bad, the ugly of CrossFit. And we go into a lot more as well. So without further ado, guys, here he is, the man himself, Derek Woodske. Enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. Hey guys, and welcome to episode 29 of the Revive Yourself podcast. Today, as always, we're really lucky to have a great guest, someone who I first met, I think it might have been back in 2008, maybe 2009, when I was personal training and went down to do a Poliquin course in Bournemouth, I think it was, and I had the pleasure of being in this gentleman's company for 5 days. He's one of the characters left in the fitness industry, and his name is Derek Woodske. How are you going today, Derek?
Great. Fantastic for having me on your show. I appreciate it a huge amount. It's nice to catch back up. Yeah, I would say it's probably been at least that long. It's definitely been 7 years.
Oh, has it? Yeah. So 2008, 2009, probably about right then. Yeah. That was, I mean, it has gone pretty quick, but I always remember as I was talking about before, in the health and fitness industry. See, I'm generally at health. I was trying to stay away with a lot of the fitness stuff because a lot of it's just a lot of rubbish. A lot of what's put out there nowadays is just marketing in the fitness industry.
Yes.
Especially when I deal with nutrition and the way we deal with people, we're dealing with a lot of people with chronic issues, etc. But Derek's one of the people out there who's a bit like me, not afraid to speak his mind, and he cuts through a lot of the crap or the bullshit, for want of a better word. And it's something that I remember him talking about a lot of things, and because you've been around both the professional and the amateur side of athletics, as well as competed yourself, you're someone that everyone I think needs to listen to. And so at the time, no worries. At the time, you were teaching for the Poliquin Group. But just for the audience, just give a little introduction. Probably something you've done so many times, probably bored to death of hearing it yourself. But just for the audience, just give a little introduction into you, your background, and what you're doing now, really.
Sure. Well, I'll definitely give the Reader's Digest version. It's myself. I started my athletic career in a small town in British Columbia, Canada, and I developed enough, even though I came from a very isolated background. You know, I grew up in a town of about 250 people in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. And somehow, through a lot of hard work and a lot of, opportunity where luck was the product of preparation and timing, I was able to get scholarships eventually to the United States. And then when I got to the United States, I was able to pursue an athletic career through the U.S. collegiate system, which is an amazing athletic development program for all sports. We see a lot of it with NCAA football and stuff on television in the United States, and we sort of get an idea of how big that industry is. And it's massive, even for sports like track and field, which I did. The money's big, the schools are big, the travel's awesome, the opportunities are fantastic typically. So I was able to develop in that system, and I had a lot of success. Along with that success, I also had a lot of setbacks. I had career-ending injury that I was able to overcome during that time, or as they say, it was a career-ending injury. For me, it was more of just a setback that took the ability to learn how to walk again in a year of my life, but those are also experiences that helped shaped my athletic career. So even though I had the success and I had the national championships, et cetera, in track and field and eventually move on to Team Canada, I also had some pretty defining situations occur to me athletically that helped sort of spawn my desire to become a little more knowledgeable about the strength and conditioning side of it. And so for me, I was always somebody that lifted weights. I was very active. I really liked the idea of physical culture, but it wasn't until I had, the real big injury in 2000 and then 2001 coming back from that I had no choice but to become a student of the science of strength and conditioning. Up until that point, I was just a guy that followed his coach's orders, which costed the injury in the first place. But I just followed a lot of orders and I did a lot of hard work, but I didn't have a lot of knowledge. And so that put me on the path of becoming educated. That path led me to my own rehabilitation, which got me more opportunities in the States, started competing again, started connecting with people like Judd Logan, who I trained with as one of his athletes post-collegiately or after I was done university studies. And I did that professionally for about 3 years. And that opened up more doors because now as I was in a higher level of competition around higher level people, that got me into situations where I could become a coach at the NCAAs for track and field, which led to a coaching job in the NFL in 2007, which inevitably led to me getting picked up by the Poliquin Group to lecture for them for a few years before I got into my current gig now. And for the last 4 years, which will be 4 years January, I've actually gone back to full-time coaching, but with specific clientele, specific athletes. I have one full-time client athlete that I work with in the Middle East, but I also coached a couple athletes through an Olympic cycle for track and field privately this past four-year period.
Oh, awesome. And there's a lot of things you mentioned there that we're going to touch on. Just quickly, how'd they get on, your athletes?
Yeah, not too bad. I had Kurt Roberts did really well. We had a couple injuries in his 4-year cycle, but he competed in 2 indoor worlds, was an outdoor U.S. national champion, and was a Diamond League event champion, as well as I think top 5 in the world performer.
Is he a hammer thrower, Derek?
He's actually a shot putter from the United States. Okay. So in the field events as well, he did really well. We had a bit of an unexpected training accident the year prior to the last Olympics, which was a little frustrating because it's a thing that no one ever thinks about with these long-term programming, and it's something we can probably get into, but it's the biggest difference between when we look at the fitness industry and the coaching industry. Now, there's pluses and minuses of both, but one of the big discrepancies that we see in the fitness industry, like Wolf spoke about previous, a lot of success is based on marketing, not knowledge or measurable result. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. It's not going to change. It's not like we can come in here with a big broom and clean up the mess and make everybody in the fitness industry adhere to these new standards. It would be nice if we could, but the reality is they don't want to change. And partially they don't have to change because of the fact that the revolving door of the fitness industry, if you're lucky, you have a client for 18 months max in their entire existence on this planet. So you're not going to see a lot of that long-term programming. Whereas in the athletic world, for better or worse, what ends up happening is that you get committed to that person. And so when you have something like drop foot occur because of a severely damaged disc in the back and you have like 12 months before the start of the Olympic season, there's no backing out of that situation. So you have to become very creative and you have to get very specific and very on top of your programming. You can't write your programming in the car on the way to the gym because you know that the goal is going to be sweating for the day. You're starting, and that's it's harsh, but harsh but true, right? So you know that when you get into those situations, you really have to have a much broader toolbox of knowledge. But the problem that you find in that side of the industry is no one ever fully realizes how big a lot of these coaches' toolboxes are, or how good of coaches they are. Because let's face it, if you're coaching a shot putter, even a guy as high level as Kurt Roberts was for myself, what does the fitness industry on social media know about that? Not a lot, nor do they care, because they're not tangible things to them that they can wrap their mind around. Kurt's a monstrous human. He's in feet and pounds, he's 6'4", 300 pounds, or he's a meter 95, 140 kilos. So he's a huge human being. But at the end of the day, he's not going to be on the cover of Flex magazine this month, right? He's a completely different animal. And because of that, people don't attach an understanding to it very well in our industry of how complicated it is to coach those guys.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's something, what you mentioned there as well, it's just because most people working with people who have a job, it's in the public sector or private sector, whatever way you actually want to word it. People work with personal training clients, etc. Majority of them, it's just to look better, generally. And even a lot of the time, they don't even get to the point of making them feel better, because they're so jacked up. Yeah, so jacked up on stimulants, so jacked up on maybe anti-inflammatories. Lots of times, this is why I know I'm going to have clients for life, because not only are people eating all the wrong things, but then they're also being sent to people like this, and they're hugely inflamed, and it's a nightmare. But something you said there, having been in the sporting industry myself, professional side, I'm been in lucky to be around Gloucester Rugby and Crusaders Rugby, etc. Worked with Ashley Jones. Know how good coaches can be. I also been around some terrible coaches, and one of the things you said there in your little bio was you followed orders and it led to you getting an injury. And this is where a lot of coaches, I feel, it's like I always say to my clients, although we've got a process, there's no standard. So we've got a structure. There's no standard process because there's no standard human being. When a standard human being walks through the door, then I can just start giving out programs. But it doesn't work that way. So when a programmer says you got to deadlift this on a Monday or whatever you got to do on a Tuesday, Wednesday, you come in and go, Coach, I'm really tired. I don't feel great, etc. And they go, well, on the program it says you're doing this today.
Right.
And one of the things that my problem is with. One of the things I observe, and especially in America, because they've got such a depth of people they can choose from, a lot of their programs, it's just, you know what, we're just going to smash people until only the last one or two are standing, and they're going to be the ones that we're going to play. And I've even heard, I think, you yourself say quite a few times, Paul Check's mentioned it quite a few times, even Paulo Coelho and a lot of other coaches. Judd has even said a lot of the athletes actually make it in spite of their programs. Because they're just smashed to bits, rather than saying, you know what, well, because as you said, if you're one coach, you're dealing with 25 athletes maybe, you haven't got that time to work with people individually. So someone like who's very people who invest in an individual coach, probably going to be doing themselves a huge favour, because they actually get to listen to them and their body. Was that something you probably agree with?
Yes, I think that's fairly accurate. And I believe that one of the faults of the professional coaching side, until you get to the sporting level where you have guaranteed contracts, because then the player super exceeds the coach and the coach gets fired before the player will ever get released. So in the NFL, for example, being a strength coach in the NFL has a very vulnerable shelf life, and God forbid you injure somebody coaching in the NFL, because you'll be out the door the next day, typically. Especially if it's your fault. But below that, especially through the NCAA's, Olympic sports, basically sports where the athlete doesn't always have the financial leg up on the administration or the coaching staff, in those sports, you have a tendency to see a lot of situations where the athlete is so desperate for success or so desperate for a program that they will adhere to whoever they're with, and the coach will use like an attrition rate to basically get the cream to rise to the top. Yeah. So we used to call it the crocodile principle within our programs, because we had a very successful program in college, but we had a lot of injuries. And we used to say that those that made it through injury-free and still had success were like crocodiles because they were able to make it through extinction, right? They had that rare ability to withstand horrible circumstance. And that's a frustrating thing for me because I, as an athlete, having gone through it, I know what it's like to have horrible coaches, and I know what it's like to have phenomenal coaches. Yeah. And going back in retrospect, there's no way for me to have known because I was a better soldier than a question asker at that point in my life. So if I could go back to those times, my tolerance for the bullshit that a lot of these coaches implement would be a lot lower because they are jeopardizing your one shot. So, and that's the thing that people don't realize. Like, I get my shit together tomorrow, or I get my shit together at 65, I could probably still find my abs if I adhere to a good program of nutrition and sleep and rest and things like this. I don't even have to squat 500 pounds to achieve that. I just have to take care of myself. Sports is not the same. So when someone manipulates that one moment in time and fucks you up over it, that window closes. I'll never have another chance for that sporting moment. Sports are a young man's game. They're a very finite game. They're a game that requires a lot of specific skills and development. It's not something that can be really manipulated late into life. So when a coach damages that moment for you, that moment's gone forever. And that's something that I'm really hard on now as a veteran coach is my tolerance for these other types of coaches that don't have any concern about the welfare of an athlete. Man, that's a sore subject for me for sure. Now, with that being said, you did mention something that is quite unique. The fact that when you look at cohesive programming where not everybody's the same, it's hard to, so you get into a situation where, for example, you'll get a lot of coaches that they immediately just go with very base flat number training protocols. So they'll be like flat loading sets and reps. Everybody's doing 70%. There's no variation. Athlete A through Z is all doing the exact same piece of paper. Now, to a degree, you can group body types. Yeah. And so in a sport like American football, all your big guys can be together. All your big guys can sort of do the same program. All your wideouts can do the same program. All your quarterbacks can do the same program. So that's fine because there's going to be similarities in somatotype structuring and how those people function in the weight room, and then you make variations based on those people. However, the one thing that I found in my own experience as a coach and what I discovered when I was starting to program is there still needs to be a little bit of leeway in terms of each individual athlete's perceived energy level on the day. And that's a huge factor because I know from my own experience, a lot of my injuries perhaps could have been prevented if I had some gray areas. So say, for example, instead of coming in and knowing that the whole team had to do 5 sets of 5 at 75% in the deadlift, hypothetically, what if that program had simply been written 5 sets of 4 to 6 with a percentage range that correlated to the repetitions every day. So you could be as high as 80, but as low as 72. You could pick and choose the repetitions. The total cumulative volume at the end of the cycle is still roughly the same. You're still going to get stronger. And so that's what I started to do when I started programming myself. And then for athletes years later is the biggest reason I started to put in, say, fluctuating repetition variables on the majority of my workouts and fluctuating percentages every single day for every single exercise outside of my core lift, Olympic lifts, was the fact that I knew that I was going to have an athlete that could come in, and if they're fresh, they're going to smash the highest percentage for the highest reps on the day. And that's your A performance from your A recovered guy, and you're like fantastic. But if I have a guy come in or a girl come in, they're not feeling great, and say the A workout would have been 5 5s at 77%, but I give them a window where they could get away with doing 5 4s at 72%, and it's still the exact same workout for the day, then they can do that and they can make that personal choice without feeling the social pressure or feeling the sense of like.
That's a huge thing what you're saying there. Social pressure, 100%. So I think Derek's just got a little van going by, but I would say just because I know what it's like to be in that situation where everyone's doing it, and obviously you get in a weight room with a load of guys, even girls, athletes, and everyone's juiced up, and they're saying whatever. It takes a lot of mental strength to say, you know what, guys, I'm not feeling very good today. I'm going to just drop it down.
100%, and yeah, it's so funny, dude, that you mentioned the car outside. So I live in Colorado. I can count on one hand the number of times I've heard city traffic where I live. And that was probably number 3 in 3 years. So, but no, you're 100% right. And so for a perfect example, and this, and I tell these stories, I actually never used to tell these stories. I'll be completely honest, because I felt like when I told them, it actually, it distracted people from listening to my information about strength and conditioning, because I had this fear that if I told these stories that people would be like, well, he's always been strong. What does he know about lifting? Right? Because you get some of that bullshit with people. But when I was in college, we used to train with a strong group of like 18 to 22-year-old athletes. And I remember clearly when we did our fall preparation, this was how flat loaded, simple it was. Like, it just brutal. So we trained 6 days a week. The first 3 days repeated themselves on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and all they did was repeat the exact same workout, but the volume would be cut down to 50%. The repetitions were doubled. That's it. That's as simple as this guy made it. And so, for example, say September was the start of our fall conditioning for lifting. We would come in week 1, we would do 5 sets of 10. Week 2, so crazy, 4 sets of 10, 3 sets of 10, 2 sets of 10 in week 4, and your last set would be a max effort. That was September. The only thing that changed in October is the 10 reps became 8 reps, right? And people don't realize that getting strong is really that simple. Yeah. And we had some freaks on our team. But I remember I was about 105 kilos in body weight, maybe. And I had a group of guys that I trained with. Some were Olympians, some weren't. And at the end of that 4-week fall cycle, and we were high altitude too. Up in Wyoming, we're about 7,600 feet above sea level. So it's one of the highest universities in the country, much higher than Denver even. And I squatted 550, so whatever that is, 250K, whatever. Yeah, squatted 550 pounds for 10 reps at that body weight at the end of 4 weeks as a part of my fall conditioning. And what people have to understand is I still wasn't the strongest guy in my training group in college. The guy that I trained with, he squatted 280K for 10 at the end of conditioning cycles. And this is just belt and wraps. These are like 18, 19-year-old drug-tested college athletes that aren't even lifting as their priority. What people have to understand, we're still cranking out 3 hours of practice every day. We just lift because we're told to lift at this point in our life. But what happens with that is the group think and the social structure that comes with that type of mentality definitely allows an individual to super exceed their own personal limitations. But what it also has a tendency to do, the positives, is that's how you get a team of athletes to be extremely successful, is because the weak will get very strong. The strong have a tendency to still lead. Like, everyone always thinks that a homogenized program brings the top to the middle and the bottom to the middle. Top are always top, yeah. Man. Top, that's.
They want to stay at the top, right?
Yeah, man. High achievers will always be high achievers. But what has a tendency to do is the average comes up. And that's fantastic. Those are great things for life, for business, all that shit. The problem is is those that have a tendency to always have to overshoot to stay in the middle or overshoot to reach the top and stay with the top guys. They stop listening to the micro level injury, the micro level discomfort. All that stuff has an amazing way of fading to the peripheral when you are in a situation where there's incredibly powerful group think. So even though it's extremely positive, you have a tendency to shut off the negative. And that's something no one ever talks about, right? Like getting into a situation that's so fucking positive that you forget that the negative also was giving you information that was useful.
This is true in all walks of life, though, right?
Absolutely.
In terms of, you can touch on this with politics or anything, whatever you're talking about, like the group. And so when you're saying that, I mean, this is like that. I mean, it's so true, and this is where people even start to. Yeah, I mean, I know you've been there because people also think, well, it's something I always touch on. People think, well, I've got a little injury here, or this is happening, but I mean that's normal, right? Everyone gets it. No, it's not normal. It's just common.
It's just common,
and that's the thing. And so what you're saying there is 100% right, and it's something I've tried to. It's just because obviously you get some athletes listening, a lot of weekend warriors, because this is something we're going to go into, and a lot of people. Like myself, like you said there, a lot of coaches can go, well, you know, we can just trash people, and look, it's worked for him. He's my Olympic athlete, he's my Olympic success. Yeah, but how many other Olympic successes would you have had if you'd given one person a day's rest? One of my other mentors, Ruben Debares, used to run 400 metres for Great Britain, and he said sometimes he'd say, well, you're doing this today, and he'd say, no, coach, I've got a bad hamstring. He'd lie just so he could go and sit on the couch.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's probably why he eventually became a high-level champion, because he had a little bit of that ability to take control of himself. And you have to have a little bit of blind faith in any endeavor in life, right? You do have to, because it does get you through the grinding days, right? And there's going to be grinding days where you do have to push through some things where you need the volume of repetition to achieve the success in the finite. And that's important stuff. And you can't downplay it for sure. But there is a bit of this broken methodology. And there was a coach in the U.S. who's quite high level. He himself was a successful guy, but he was given a lecture at Sornick Summer Strong 9, so 2 years ago. And he made a really interesting point. What he had said was, and this was a guy that was a 10-year member of the Special Forces, so he had been through all selection stuff. He had gone through all that world. This was a hard operator. This guy was no joke. But he's also a sports performance coach and a high-performance guy. And he's like, listen, he's like, if your athletes are always puking or always hurt or can't walk after your workouts, you're doing something wrong. Yeah. And, a lot of people don't want to believe that because it's their own only measurable metric, right? So especially in the fitness world where maybe they're not competing, if they don't have one of those results or have one of those hangover symptoms from their training, they don't actually know where they are on the paradigm of success. They don't know how they stack up. They don't know how well they compete with their peers. There's nothing because none of it's measurable. It's just some people grinding. And for me, I'm like, listen, that you have to understand, like when I was at my peak physical readiness as an athlete, like so when I broke the Canadian national record, my snatch was like 142K power snatch. I was squatting 320 kilos. I was doing all these things right. I was training 6 days a week, multiple times a day. And what people have to understand is during that phase of training, I was never sore.
Yeah.
I had days where I'd wake up because I was a hammer thrower, which is a ballistic event, and I'd have some tightness. I'd have some residual stiffness in my back because of the nature of my sport. But I never, like this bullshit, this fucking meme world we live in, like leg day, day after leg day, day after leg day. Well, I had a sport that was leg day every day, and I never had a day after leg day, and I was still squatting 300 kilos. So
is that because your body adapted to it, or is that because you were training? Because a lot of people don't understand is because obviously you're in the industry, you're a top level coach. I've been around it for years now. we understand there's a difference between training muscles for growth and to train the CNS, right? So when you're doing that, and you say it's a ballistic event, so you're trying to, I mean, at the end of the day, you don't really care if you get on stage and you're not 6% body fat, ripped to bits.
Right.
You care about how far you can throw that hammer. And so you're training your CNS. So for people out there, when you're training your central nervous system, that's why you can wake up in the morning and you can just feel, oh, today I don't feel that great, because things like these complex... Derek said something there when he said about smashing people, and the only barometer they got is if they throw up or if they're sweating. We're going to go into CrossFit in a little bit. Just because it's a little bit about that. There's good things and bad things. That's one of the things that they say. But when you're trying to, for example, someone plays 90 minutes of football, that's going to take a lot of wear and tear on their muscles, but also central nervous system if they're jumping, moving, sprinting, etc. Soccer, football over there, football over here, soccer over there. Someone like yourself, you're throwing the hammer. Boom, it's a big explosive movement. People that are doing power cleans in the gym, etc. Although they're not, well, unless you're doing some CrossFit workouts, these repetitions are generally 1 to 5, you know? You're not going into that hypertrophy state or where you're really going to be causing a lot of trauma to the muscles. So for people just to understand that, that's why you can still get great adaptations and you can release growth hormone and all these other great hormones, but you're not getting that huge trauma to the muscle that's going to cause you to be sore. And is that one of the reasons why that was happening for you?
There's no question. And so, for example, when you look at, so there's going to be an argument, okay? So, and I have to acknowledge the argument because I am friends with guys like, good buddies with a guy like Ben Pekulski, whose entire system is based around muscle stress and the growth of hypertrophy. So, okay, so when we step back,
right? So I don't want to. I just want to tell people when I do this, but just because my audience just want to get them to understand. He's a bodybuilder, and so when we're talking about these, at the highest level, and so when you're talking about them, for example, just quickly, just for me, same as you probably. When I used to play rugby, I used to play at about 86 to 88 kg. Yeah, I now play football at a weekend level, but we still train twice a week. I get 90 minutes on a Saturday, 90 minutes on a Tuesday. I now run around at about 75 to 76 kg. Completely different, and the training is a lot different to it. So just want people just to understand that, like, it's horses for courses. So you're talking about the program there. Ben is a bodybuilder, and so he's all about stress.
Yeah, so he's looking to basically maximize tissue stress regardless of movement dynamic, in the sense that, if he can get the stress to a tissue in the quadricep using a leg extension, he doesn't care what you can back squat, right? Because it's an irrelevant conversation. And I fully agree and understand that. But what has a tendency to happen is, when you take, say, pure Olympic lifting to the right of the spectrum and pure IFBB bodybuilding to the left of the spectrum, because we live in a world where social media needs rights and lefts, we need blacks and whites in terms of simplicity of decision making. Everything is very simple here, zeros and ones. It's almost like that mentality has really polarized everything. So we have guys way to the right, we have guys and girls way to the left, and nobody's really having a conversation about the middle. So the people way to the left in the muscle training world will say, if you're not causing huge traumatic trauma to tissue, then you're not reaching your goals. Huge traumatic trauma to tissue is going to make you very sore, blah, blah, blah. The people on the far right, because you're being measured by what happens on the field of play, you want to maximize human movement for the sake of athletic endeavor, and any sort of loss of power due to a mechanical inhibition or a chemical CNS inhibition is going to result in a lack of success. Okay, so that's your two arguments, and they're both correct in their given world. The problem is people don't realize that there's still a massive linear spectrum between those two, 100%. Where there's going to be times where you need to train muscle for the sake of injury prevention, regardless of movement pattern. And there's going to be times where you need to train movement pattern to stimulate CNS development to maximize future muscle growth, right? So it goes both ways. And it's really an important point. Now, with that being said, was there times in my life where I was sore training? Yeah, of course. Everybody gets sore training. But going back to the original question, where I think that stems from and why when I was at my peak physical shape, I didn't carry a lot of traumatic mechanical stress to the tissue, making me sore, even though there would be times where my central nervous system was suppressed from the stress of training, is due to the fact that as you adapt or have long-term adaptation to training, and this is where it goes back to the difference between sport and fitness, is if you set up a proper program that has hypertrophy, strength, fat loss, all those things mixed into it over time, my results of being really strong and fit and having no injuries in June are a product of the fact that I've been doing a slow progressive adaptation process for 12, 18, 36, 48 months. And that's where you start to lose people, because they're like, you've been training with the same mindset for 48 months? Yeah, 48. I've been probably training with the same mindset for 120 months. Like when you really start to think about it that way. And when you start to break it down into those pieces, then you're like, okay, so that starts to make a little bit more sense. For the people that are continuously getting sore and every fucking Monday is leg day, like every Monday they're the day after leg day, well, then you have to step back and be like, listen, the reason why you're continuously getting sore is, especially if you're an athlete or if something else and you're not training specifically for that purpose, is because you're probably changing variables or you're manipulating and playing with your volumes and stresses to the system way too dramatically. Yeah. And you will always have a tendency to get sore or have some sort of mechanical reaction to trauma if you're continuously manipulating how you stress the body. So if every single day you train legs, you do the hardest thing possible, but it never replicates really what you did the week before, and every week you're changing it, and you make up some excuse that you're trying to maximize adaptation, and then you're trying to trick the body into growing, and you're doing all this thing, and you don't want the body to become stagnant. Well, yeah, you're probably not going to have a lot of success performance-wise. And I'm not even so sure over time you'll have maybe the greatest amount of success in hypertrophy, because so much of your energy will be going into trying to understand new movement patterns, trying to recover traumatic trauma to the tissue, and you may not systematically train or stress the tissue the right way to even get hypertrophy. Right? Because you're stressing the tissue in so many different tensions and directions that you may not get enough accumulative stress in the same direction to, say, make your quads grow. Right? So like 1 week your quads are blown out because you were doing so much knee extension work. The next week you don't even think about it and you accidentally do nothing but posterior driven work. And then the next week it's something else and you're like, well, I don't understand why I'm not growing. Well, you're not growing because you've only really stimulated to the point of stress your knee extensors, once in the last, 3 weeks, because you haven't properly put it all together correctly.
Yeah, 100%.
Does that make sense? Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, it's a long answer, but yeah.
No, 100% makes sense. And it's just one of those things. It's like, what was I going to say on that? Just because to get people to understand, for example, if you're doing a block of training, say it's going through, so a lot of people go to the gym, they've got personal trainers, or maybe it's one of the things at CrossFit. People wonder how, well, first of all, I'm going to go into me. If I'm doing, for example, so I've been doing squats or deadlifts for a while, and then I go mix it and go to lunges. The first time I mix it up and go lunges, the next day I'm going to be a little sore. But after doing it for the next whatever weeks, the best one for it is when you change your hamstring moves. If I do deficit deadlifts compared to RDL or something like that, when I change it for the first time, I'm going to get a little bit of tension in my hamstrings that I haven't had for a little while. But the more I do it, the body adapts. But I'm still training that part of my body, still getting that response. And you don't have to do it so much. And people, I don't know if it was, I can't remember where it was, who said it. It may have been you, it may have been someone else, but people like to. The best program is the one that you're not doing, right? People are always wondering about the program or somebody else is doing this because, and it's something we wanted to get into, but it's. I want to talk about your programs later on because I know Derek's got his own website. He used to have Mammals Guide to the Universe, but now he's does some brilliant videos on there. I was talking about it before. It's cracked me up, especially. He's only got a few up there now because he said it was a bit of an insight into a window at that time of his life. But he's now got a website, www.ecobolic.com, where he's got programs. I mean, they go into that at a bit of a later date. But because a lot of people I deal with as well, I mean, this is such a huge one. Could you touch on something there for a minute? I don't know where to go with it. I can speak to you for hours there. This is the problem. Right, so you mentioned a little bit there, the only time people can sort of have a barometer for their successes, or for a client, if they're dealing with a personal training client, is did we make them sweat today? Were they physically tired? Right, which is something like CrossFit. Basically, our workout is so your warm up. Sorry, your workout is our warm up. So you were mentioning some of the numbers you did there. So you were squatting 320 kgs. And that's numbers most people can't even compute, you know. But you're a big guy. Yeah, you're a big guy, and even your client said he's squatting whatever he's squatting. He says he's 300 pounds, 6'4". These are big human beings. They're moving big weights because they're big human beings. Someone like myself, those weights are. I mean, unless I'm going to start moving myself into Olympic weightlifting, which is not happening anytime soon, my numbers are always going to be a lot lower than that. But you see some of these people, right? For example, CrossFit, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So go into your thoughts on it. But a lot of these people are 5'10". Yeah, my size. They're weighing 200 pounds, maybe. I know.
Yeah, it's about 80k. Yep, right. 80 to 90k is pretty common now.
But the average person in the gym goes there, and first of all they're giving. I mean, one of the things Paul Jack said, which was brilliant. He said, like, you get a lot of these people. CrossFit, for want of, it's got. Right, as you said before, there's no bad programs, just incorrectly prescribed programs, and a lot of these people have never really trained before, and they're in there and they're doing complex moves like snatches and like overhead lunges. It's like, well, I don't mind if you learn to juggle, but learn to juggle with oranges first, not knives, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So what these people are doing, they see these people on TV and they look phenomenal. This is the thing about CrossFit. The ones that compete at the top level, they look like they could step on stage.
It goes back to the same thing, you know, and the pool is massive. It's even bigger than what I was dealing with in college, but you're looking at the crocodile principle. You're looking at people that can handle and tolerate both physically and psychologically massive amounts of training stimulus and still come out of it and have the ability to compete. Now,
but just quickly, before you have your thought on that, one of the questions that I asked you was, and it's about Usain Bolt as well, and these CrossFit guys.
Sure.
PEDs. So,
absolutely.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
so when people say that sport's clean and stuff, people don't understand. They're like, well, no, they're not doing it. It has, and people will swear blind that Usain Bolt hasn't taken steroids. I'm not here to say he has or hasn't, but I've got my opinions on it. But these people at CrossFit, they look ridiculous, and they're training 3 times a day, 7 days a week. Their performance doesn't drop. You can't do that as a normal human being without being completely smashed, right?
Listen, it's regardless of what people want to believe, and people like to believe a lot of shit, and and the narrative changes depending on how you want to sleep at night, right? So, okay, for example, Mr. Jones has a child. His son, little Bobby, trains his ass off until he's 18, but doesn't make it to the NFL. Doesn't become, because he's not good enough, he's not big enough, whatever. Doesn't make it to the NFL. So Mr. Jones is going to be the guy that goes, you know what? Everybody in the NFL is on PEDs. Fuck that. That's why little Bobby didn't make it to the NFL. That's going to be his narrative, right? Then there's the other narrative. The other narrative is people that are not associated and don't have a personal invested interest in something. Maybe they do CrossFit for fun, but they have no desire to compete. So when they see these other people, they look at them as a little bit of hero worship. And then the narrative is, no way, man, those guys are totally natty. Everything they do is on the level. They eat paleo. And
a lot of them eat shit as well. Like, they eat terrible. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And so the narrative changes. And so the truth is always in the middle, and you have to sort through it all. And you just have to look at things logically. And then I'll give a real example, true story example. And this should sum up how widespread what I refer to as recreational PED use is just in society. Yeah. Okay. So we have hormone replacement therapy, and all that stuff is really valuable. So I'm a guy who is a full disclosure guy. I'm a big believer that as you age, you need to go to a doctor and start to talk about your hormones, because there's some weird shit that happens, especially in today's 7 billion population, that is causing our hormones to get a little weird. So I have no problem with people taking HRT. Now, as soon as I say that, the reality, and I'm not a fool, is we got a lot of 30-year-old guys on HRT taking 1,000 milligrams a week, right? Because they get a script and then they go batshit crazy. So there's that, there's that side of it as well. But there's also the health benefits. Now, so you remove that and you get rid of all the stigma. So as a guy that personally has no stigma towards PEDs, I think that you got to adhere to the rules of the field. But as far as some recreational guy taking testosterone at 42 because it makes him feel a little better and he gets morning wood back, you know what? All the power to him. I don't give a shit, right? So that's, it's not my concern. There's much worse things in the world to worry about. But to give a perspective of how widespread it is, you got to look at the fitness industry, CrossFit, all these things. CrossFit's it should be a no-brainer. Just the amount of volume, and at the end of the day, anabolics are not muscle growers; they're restoration increasers. Yeah. So when you look at anabolic use, there's some statistical research that shows that there might be an increase in CNS activation with some drugs, and there might be a little bit of muscle contractile speed increase with some substances, some stuff that comes from the old DDR files in the former Soviet Union. So we know that there are some compounds out there that have a direct effect on, say, 100-meter sprint time. But at the end of the day, the majority of people saying the 100 meters at the Olympics, they're completely off because they need to get rid of that cellular water retention and blood volume to be able to run their fastest. So, for example, sprinters, if they are they use further away from the Olympics than people would ever assume. Yep. The only reason Ben Johnson tested positive is because he had a torn hamstring and he was using all the way through. So when you look at those types of situations and you remove those highlights, anabolics are a restoration increaser. So a sport like CrossFit, absolutely, with those volume parameters and requirements just to be mildly successful at the games, requires a huge amount of restoration measurement, of which anabolics is the most logical and easiest way to do it. Yeah. Now, real world scenario. About 4 years ago, I had a friend training a woman in South Africa. And we're not talking athletes. We're talking general everyday folks. Good looking 40-year-old woman. She was lean, all that shit. Doesn't matter. And she was talking about her former personal trainer. And her former personal trainer had put her on a supplement, which we know to be Anavar, right? But she didn't have a clue. So he was like, yeah, I got this great supplement. It'll help you get lean, blah, blah, blah. It's a low dose, yada, yada, yada. She had no clue about PEDs. She's not even from the fitness world. She was a former model that's built really well, has a couple kids. Okay, yeah, okay. So this gives you a perspective. So she remembers taking it for about 3 months. Of course, she had incredible results. Of course, she got leaner and harder than she normally would have. She had all those things because she was already dedicated to the lifestyle. So when I heard that story, I remember being so blown away that I couldn't believe it, right? So it was like one of those stories that I told everybody. And so then I turned around, and I'm still working for the Polycone Group, and there was a really good female trainer associated with the company at the time. And I remember telling her this story. And she was so blown away, like I was, that she started telling everybody, right? Because she couldn't believe it. And she goes to one of her friends in Montreal
she was coaching with you, wasn't she? Yeah, I know you're talking about it.
Yep. Yeah, so she's talking to one of her coaches in Montreal and telling them the story. And the person goes, oh, yeah. This coach over here does that as well. and totally tells the exact same story from a different perspective. And that's when I sat back and I'm like, okay, hold on. So you're telling me a random woman in Cape Town, South Africa is being given Anavar by her trainer at some shit gym no one ever heard of. And so is this woman up in Montreal, Canada by another trainer at some other shit gym that no one's ever heard of. They couldn't be more further removed from one another, but they're both experiencing the exact same thing. If that's the case, then this is such a widespread epidemic, both people taking it, not knowing what it is, or people taking it, being told that it's not harmful nowadays, that it fully starts to explain how inundated the fitness and sporting world has become with anabolic and PED use. I would even go as far as to surmise that fucking professional sports have now become cleaner than the average gym is. Yeah. And that never used to be the case. Anabolics used to be a subculture secret weapon that really hardcore people would play with and athletes that could get away with it would use. And now we got guys like John Jones popping for a second or third time in the UFC of all things, fully illustrating the fact that nobody is even protecting the superstars of an industry. Right? If John Jones is going to be allowed to test positive again for an anabolic, then clearly all the professional athletes are in the crosshairs of testing. So when people are like, yeah, they're protecting this athlete or they're protecting that athlete, I hate to break it to people, they're not. They're just not. Drug testing in sports has become much more stringent than the chaos which has now become, say, fucking some gym in London or some gym in New York. Like, that's where you're seeing this rampant, uneducated use of PEDs.
Yeah, and it's the thing is with it, there's so many ways to go about this one as well, because it's like when it comes to sports performance, for example, these people, it's such a, see, you know what, I don't really care. I mean, I've got my views on certain people, what they do and don't do. I mean, yep. Is it any? I mean, Usain Bolt, this time he ran it in didn't run it under 10 seconds, I don't think, and when he won it in 9.58. Like you do the math, you know. And he jogged the last 10 meters or whatever it was. Don't win it too quick. Don't win it too quick, because then people really will start asking questions, you know. And it's if you listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, and he's got people on there talking about it and saying, look, you have to be an idiot. He said, I can get a donkey to pass a PED test. He said, you've got to be an idiot or extremely lazy to get caught. And they're also talking about Lance Armstrong, for example, the most tested athlete of all time, never actually got caught with a positive test. He got dimed out by his friends. So you think that you've got the best people in the world trying to catch these people. You've got even better people trying to hide them if you're paying, and it just a change one molecule. But for me, it was the fact that sports like CrossFit, or even there's a gym in London that I know you work out, but it gets called out all the time for maybe photoshopping their results and people using steroids, etc. Yeah, but people don't understand long term. I mean, there's lots of things people can change, but when you're going into like a CrossFit gym and you're wondering how people look a certain way, even though you're all trained the same. This is why I just like to bring it up, because I want people to realise that sometimes there are other factors at play as well. So you don't get down on yourself. I mean, it's something that because the people are just like, oh, how is he doing? We used to have people. I used to work at CrossFit gym years ago, and people would come in, and some guys would just be like, mate, like he's 4% body fat, jacked to beyond belief, and he wasn't like that 6 months ago, you know. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to work it out, but it's just for people to think that that's if you want to go down that path. But long term, getting your diet right, your sleep right, getting your water right, these things, all of a sudden, you're going to start to get that increase in performance. But it might take a little bit longer, like you said about your things. And for you're squatting. This is the reason as well, Derek. You look at yourself. You don't look like someone who's abused drugs, you know. You're not like someone, Whereas a lot of people, you look at them and go, So you've got a certain look, you know.
There is a look. It's and like I'd alluded to earlier when we were talking on this interview podcast, it was so. For example, something I never talk about because I don't want to disenfranchise the listeners. but I wrote about it and I mentioned it on Power Athlete Radio recently. The very first time I ever squatted in my life, literally, like, I'd done some movements with the bar as a teenager, but when I was 16 years old, the very first time I ever squatted a max RM was in a competition. I signed up for this local thing, never having done it before. And I fucking squatted 200 kilos, right? So outrageous. It's outrageous. I even know it is because I know what it's like now 20 years later to try to get people to squat 200 kilos consistently. That is always going to play a factor. Mm-hmm. So there are certain attributes. So for example, I eventually had an athlete who at 100 kilos ran a 10.6 100 meters in a state track meet. Mm-hmm. And he went on to squat 400 kilos at 110 kilos in body weight, right? So he squatted 880 at fucking 235, 240 pounds. He was about 6% body fat. Now, you're going to have those highlights in every walk of life. The difference is those people typically, when you've come from a real coaching background, those are like your once-a-decade kids.
Yeah, 100%.
You know?
Yeah. You're Tiger Woods, yeah? You're Tiger Woods, you're Johnny Wilkinsons, you're whatever it is.
And so, yeah, so they'll get highlighted, and someone will be like, "Man, I don't know, I think that guy's on." Well, yeah, it's a legit question to ask. But when you walk into a gym and you have 15 of them,
yeah, that's the thing. Yeah,
that's when you have to step back and be like, okay, so based on the old like Soviet principle. They used to believe that hormones were in everybody, but some people had less and some people had more. That's what they used to talk about, going back 20 years. And so a guy like myself who had, full body hair at 15, squatting 400 kilos at 16 with no experience, I probably had a little more. Right? I own it. I get it. It's why it is what it is. My athlete, he too probably had a little more. Now, what the Soviets used to believe, and the Hungarians in particular, if you tested somebody and they had a little less, then they just would supplement them until the playing field was all equal.
Right, exactly, yeah. So it's a different argument, right? That's a little bit of like people go, well, now they're fairly equal.
Right?
Now who's better at the technical bits rather than just like naturally, but that's part of it.
It is, and so people used to be like, well, why do their top guys not test positive, but their mid-rung guys do? Well, that's why. Mm-hmm. Because they weren't supplementing their genetic freaks as heavily or at all. So they would sneak through and keep winning, and then their like second, third place guys were always testing positive, right? And so when you think of it that way, now, jump into the future to a CrossFit box whereversville, and you walk in and you see 15 guys all sort of looking the same and all pretty much on the same program. Well, all you're really seeing is that theory and practice. The guys that aren't quite as good are using a little bit more to start to balance out the middle, and then the guys at the top don't have to use as much, and they all start to look the same.
Yeah, and they do look the same. They all look. I mean, if you see a line up for it, they just look.
Yeah,
they look phenomenal, a lot of them, but it's just they literally look the same. Like, and the women when it's like some of the women, I'm like, come on. A woman doesn't look like that. She's got a tortoise shell on her back. It doesn't look. A woman doesn't look like that. So it's just something I just wanted to touch on because I know. Yeah. Because people can get in their head like right, and this is why I know I'm happy to walk around. My physique, it's completely different. It depends on what you want to do. Not for it, not against it. If you want to go for it, but for me, I'm very, very natural. I like to be like that, and this gets to a certain age, like you said, where you need to do little things. That's different. But,